Got back just in time. Yes, you did. For the folks online, we added a couple people back to the prayer list. Dawn and Rosa Faircloth. Dawn's been on there. Rosa hadn't, but we're adding them on. And Alma Little. And also we put Jackie Gagne back on. Not sure what's going on with her, but her I guess grandparents asked for that. And then we put on Jane Allman family, Jimmy Eford family, and we also Claude Brooks has got a scan this Friday, and so we added him on there. We'll be praying for him and that scan and the results and so forth. We are in 1 Samuel chapter 6. Sounds like all y'all are already there because I don't hear any pages turning, so that's great. It's interesting. Last week we had chapter 5, verses 1 through 12, but that was because that's the whole chapter. Here we have chapter 6, 1 through 12, but that's actually only going halfway through the chapter. What we talked about in chapter 5 was the Philistines, a very difficult experience that they had after they captured the Ark of Israel, or also known as the Ark of God. And one thing that I did, and we still haven't gotten to the title yet, but you'll see later in the PowerPoint presentation, is I brought over that Ark background that we had. Just as it's all talking about God, our background for today's PowerPoint as we go through. But before we get there, as we arrive at chapter 6, we get how the Philistines come to the conclusion that this ark is a problem, and glad they wisened up to that because it is a big problem. But then they have to ask all these questions really about how they should go about it. And as I looked at this, and I'm going to try to walk through it with you, I've really thought about how a lot of these are the same types of questions that we ask when we are faced with problems and when we deal with things. And it's interesting, some of the answers that they get. So the way I titled it was, good questions. I think they're all good questions, and the same kind of questions we ask. But they're really questionable answers that they come up with. And I think that's one of our things a lot of times is, we might get answers to our questions, but we got to figure out whether that's good answer or not. And as we go through here, I'm saying these are good questions. These are logical questions for the Philistines to be asking. Whether or not these are good answers, well, that's up for debate. So we're just going to kind of walk through their experience with that. As you follow along in your outline and follow along on the screen, you'll see that it's sort of like, all right, these are the questions. And these are the way the questions are answered. And we'll kind of explore this story from that perspective. But first, we're going to go ahead. We're going to read chapter 6, 1 Samuel chapter 6, verses 1 through 12. It says, Now the ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines for 7 months. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we should send it to its place. So they said, If you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return it to him with a trespass offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. Then they said, What is the trespass offering which we shall return to him? And they said, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden rats, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For the same plague was on all of you and on all your lords. Therefore you shall make images of your tumors and images of your rats that ravage the land, and you shall give glory to the God of Israel, and perhaps he will lighten his hand from you and from your gods and from your land. Why then do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts when he did mighty things among them? Did they not let the people go that they might depart? Now, therefore, make a new cart. Take 2 milk cows which have never been yoked, and hitch the cows to the cart, and take their calves home away from them. Then take the ark of the Lord and set it on the cart, and put the articles of gold which you are returning to him as a trespass offering in a chest by its side. Then send it away and let it go. And watch, if it goes up the road to its own territory, to Beth Shemesh, then he has done us this great evil. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that has struck us, it happened to us by chance. Then the men did so. They took 2 milk cows, hitched them to the cart, and shut up their calves at home. And they set the ark of the Lord on the cart, and the chest with the gold rats and the images of their tumors. And then the cows headed straight for the road to Beth Shemesh, and went along the highway, lowing as they went, and did not turn aside to the right hand or the left. And the lords of the Philistines went after them to the border of Beth Shemesh. So as we were going through, especially the beginning of that, you probably saw this question and answer format kind of playing out. And so that's certainly where we start. As we talk about these good questions and these questionable answers that are then given to the good questions. So the first question that is asked very simply is, what shall we do? What shall we do? I mean, isn't that the proverbial question? I mean, we're asking the question in this upcoming sermon series where we go through the parables of Jesus, which you get a little plug in, by the way. We're going to start off with a sort of preview where we say, why did Jesus tell parables? Why did he communicate in that way? So why did Jesus tell parables this coming week? But we're focusing on to the point from asking, say, what's the point? What's the point? You know, we'd ask, what's the point of life? You know, what's the point of my job? What's the point of this relationship? What's the point of going to church? And that's some of the things we're going to put on this little ad I'm putting together that we'll put on Facebook, local Facebook pages and things, get a little advertising out of it. But this, too, is really one of the proverbial questions of life. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What shall we do? You got a problem? Isn't this the basic question that we ask when we have a problem? What are we going to do? What should we do to address this problem? And then that comes from verse 2. So you just look at the beginning of verse 2. And the Philistines called for the priests and diviners, saying, what shall we do? That's where the question comes from. By the way, you look in verse 1, just want to get a side note here. It says that the Philistines had, the ark of the Lord was in the Philistines' country for 7 months. It's interesting to me. 7 is the number of completion. So it's kind of interesting. It just happens to be 7 months. I guess that's the completion. That's the time that it was supposed to be there. And now that time was done. And it was time for God to do something different. But then you see also that the Philistines called together for the priests and the diviners. So they're calling their false priests of their false gods and also their diviners. And certainly that word has a lot to do with sort of a witchcraft kind of version of being a priest, okay? Which is basically this where they are doing these things that are false religions. These are not the Israelite priests. They're not priests that are functioning in a proper capacity. These are priests and diviners, and that's their religious leaders. So they bring them in to discuss this religious problem, and they say, what shall we do? But also you see in the second part of verse 2, they ask another question, and that is, and we'll go ahead and put it on the screen for you, is when they get the answer, then they ask, how should we send it? All right. So really, the main thing I wanted you to see here, I probably could have just put there, how should we? All right, because what you've got here is you've got a what and you've got a how. And that's really, when faced with a problem, the first kind of things that we have, what needs to be done and how are we going to do it? What do we need to accomplish And how are we going to go about it? And that's the question that we really all ask to any such problems. It says, what shall we do? Lord, tell us how we should send it to its place. And it seems that they've already sort of figured out what they think they need to do. And it seems like the priests and diviners have pretty much seen that the people have already figured this out in terms of the what, and they don't really have a much better idea, and so they kind of go off of that. As we look at the answer, we get the answer to the what, their answer to the what, they get their answer to the how. And I'm submitting to you that this is questions we should ask. You have a problem? What shall we do? And how shall we go about it? The what and the how. Their answers are unique to their situation, and they're coming from false priests and diviners. So, I'm not going to say that we can learn what our answer should be, but we can certainly learn more about God and his way as we look at their answers. So the what is this. The answer for the what is given in this form. If you send it away. It's supposed to say away. So I missed an A on the front of that one. If you send it, not if you send it away. My grammar's better than that. If you send it away, no. If you send it away, that's how they sort of say. So they know what they're already thinking of doing. They don't have any better idea. So they say in verse 3, so they said, if you send away the ark of the God of Israel. It's like saying, we don't got a better idea. If that's what you're going to do, they're kind of like, it's like they don't want to be non-committal, right? Well, if that's what you're going to do, it's really saying that's what you need to do. That's the best idea. We don't have a better idea. So they just kind of mail this one in a little bit and say, well, if you're going to send it away, and they kind of go on to the how because they don't have a better idea anyways. All of them can look and say, we need to get rid of this thing. We need to get rid of this thing. So the real question is in the how. How? And sometimes in life, the what is kind of obvious, right? But the how, that can be a lot more confusing, You might have a really bad preacher at your church, right? You might be thinking, what shall we do? We need to get rid of him. This is a fictitious story. We all know this in this case. We can get rid of him. Well, how are we going to do that? All right, because we all know that answer. Well, how are we going to do that? How are we going to go about that? Well, the how is that they say this right here. Do not send it empty. Send it, return it with an offering. All right? They think an offering. That's an interesting way that they answer that. You notice that it says right here, it says, so if you send away, it's verse 3, the ark of the Lord of God, do not send it empty, but by all means, I think that's a phrase that means you really need to do this, all right, by all means, return it to him with a trespass offering. Turn it to him with a trespass offering. It says that if you do that, making sure I'm not getting ahead of myself, my outline, I'm not. It says, it says, then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. And that's like a way of saying that you're gonna know that it has been his hand who has done this. All right. And it's interesting to me that it says a trespass offering here, because we understand a trespass offering as to be something that was an offering prescribed in God's law to the Israelites. I wonder somewhat if it's the fact that the Philistines aren't writing this. All right, Hebrews are writing this later. The Israelites are writing this later. So in their account of it, they would call this a trespass offering. What a trespass offering, though, is a guilt offering. And a guilt offering was something that was pretty well understood by the people of that time in terms of their religious systems and sacrifices. And this is meant, they think of it as meaning to bring relief by bearing the Philistines' guilt and its repercussions by making restitution through this. So it seeks to make compensation or propitiation or restitution for what has been an offense. And the offense is, first of all, that they took the ark from the people. They believe here that they will receive healing, which they very much need concerning this tumor situation, and that they will understand that once God's hand is removed once God's hand of destruction is removed from them, that it has been the Lord who has been doing this, and that they have appeased this God of the Israelites. So they say, do not send it empty, return it with an offering. I don't know if that should have been what they should have done or not. I don't know what the options were or what they would have done. We know what God did. We're going to get to that later, not here tonight. But we'll move to the next question. Because it said, if you're going to do the offering, right? Well, you've given offerings, right? Like the plate is going to pass or the opportunity to give an offering comes up. We announce, the monthly offering. You say, I'm going to give an offering. What's the next question you got to figure out? What should it be? For us, a lot of times it's like, well, how much money should it be? That's the same thing. What should it be? And that's what they ask here. The question is, what should it be? What should this offering be? Of course, they're continuing to get the advice from their diviners and priests. But we'll go to verse 4. It says, then they said, what is the trespass offering which we shall return to him? That's why he's saying that we should give to him, and we're saying it as give it in return for the guilt which we have obviously the things we've obviously been guilty of against this God. They're trying to, once again, to try to make compensation, restitution for offending this God, the God of the Israelites. So they say, what should it be? And it's an interesting answer, isn't it? Probably not what I would have come up with. So once again, the answer, I thought it was raining for a minute. No, that's the speaker. I don't know why the speaker's doing that. I am an auditory genius. Let there be silence. We'll have to remember to plug this back in. So what should it be? And they come up with, and once again, questionable answer. I don't know what this answer, but it's very interesting, okay? But what they really say with it is, they say the what answer here is that it should be something valuable and something meaningful. All right? It needs to have value and it needs to have meaning. Doesn't that sound exactly like when you're a husband? I can speak to this, but I can't speak to the wife's side. When you're a husband and you're like, what should I get her for Valentine's today, right? What should I get her for her birthday or for Christmas? Figured this out. I finally figured this out, Jennifer. You don't know I figured this out, but I have figured this out. It's supposed to be something valuable, and it's supposed to be something meaningful, right? You can't just be valuable, not after you've been married a while. It's both your money anyways, You can't just be valuable. And it can't just be meaningful. It can't be cheap and meaningful, So it needs to be valuable and it needs to be meaningful. So they come up with, and I don't suggest giving this as any upcoming gift. Can you imagine? But it's gold. I don't care if it's gold. It's in the shape of tumors and rats. They come up with, this had to be a biblical times thing, man. I don't know. 5 golden tumors and 5 golden rats. That's what they come up with. That is going to appease the God of the Israelites. But the point is here, it was valuable. It was gold. But it also had meaning. So we're going to read the verse here. We're in verse the next part, verse 4, you see there's usually an indentation there for next paragraph. They answered, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden rats, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For the same plague was on all of you and on all your lords. We know from verses 16 and 18, later in this chapter, we know that there were 5 lords of 5 cities of the Philistines. They had a city-states thing going on, kind of like the Greeks, where you had Sparta and Athens, and you had these different cities. They had 5 lords of 5 cities, and we know that specifically from later in this chapter. So that's where the number 5's coming from. But then that's the valuable, and that's where they got how many they're supposed to do. But then they had 2 sources of meaning here. And of course, one is the tumors, and I gave you the reference to chapter 5, verse 9 and 12. And so the tumors, I guess, I'm wondering, did they actually take some tumors and cover them in gold? It sounded like what they did. It's kind of gross and weird, but the whole thing's kind of weird anyway. But that the tumors are obviously representative of the tumors that came upon them in these cities. I'll just read. It said that it was he struck the men of the city, both small and great, and tumors broke out all over them. And then in verse 12, and the men who did not die were stricken with the tumors. The cry of the city went up great to heaven. Also, you see in both those verses that there was a great destruction. That term is used, and in verse 12, verse 11 of chapter 5, it's a deadly destruction. And so that tells you that there was a lot of death and destruction. And where you have death and destruction, what are you going to have? You're going to have rats. So the rats are very symbolic of the death and destruction that they experienced. And the tumors are, again, you don't need no seminary degree to figure that one out. They are symbolic of the tumors, the sickness that was brought on them. So it's really the sickness that they experienced, but also the death and destruction that they experienced. Because we know one thing, being sick is different than being dead. All right? So they're recognizing both of these, and they have this symbolism at work, but they also have value. And I really see what they were coming and saying when they said 5 golden tumors and 5 golden rats. And we kind of look at that. What I'm trying to say is what they were saying is you need to put something, you need to send it back with something that's meaningful and something that's valuable. They understood it has to have meaning and it has to have value. And so they think that will then be a great offering if it's valuable and if it's meaningful. And it seems like a very human way of thinking, doesn't it? It seems like a really good process. But it seems to me, and maybe, I don't know, maybe at the point in which they said it was gold, I don't know what, but it seems to me that, and I'm going to read verse 5 because it kind of expands a little. I didn't mean to read that. It said, therefore you shall make images of your tumors and images of your rats that ravage your land, and you shall give glory to the God of Israel. And perhaps he will lighten his hand from you and from your gods and from your land. And by the way, that word glory in there is, the Hebrew word is kabod. And it actually means weight or honor or glory. And really the thinking more is that they were saying that this offering this will be a weighty offering. This will be a meaningful offering. But it's more likely to translate it in English translations as glory, because then that same word is used throughout 1 Samuel especially, and you can then see a trend on the emphasis of the glory of God. It can also be translated glory, but here it's actually kind of in the meaning of more that this is a weighty offering. It will have weight with this God. It will give weight to it, and it will glorify him. So keep that in mind. Then it has a break at verse 6. There's a weird break because it says that, and then all of a sudden, the diviners and the priests ask a question. And they say, why then do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? And I look at that, I'm like, where did that come from? They were rolling right along. It seems to me that some discussion took place in the middle of that. Like maybe they are thinking, well, we don't really need to do this. Do we really need to send it back? There's some debate. And so some doubt comes in. And certainly doubt coming in would be a human reaction. So they ask this question, why do you harden your hearts? That's a question they ask. Why do you harden your hearts? And they say it as, why do you harden your hearts as one who, as Pharaoh and as the Egyptians hardened theirs. And it's interesting as they go by in verse 6, it says, when he did mighty things among them, did they not let the people go that they might depart? And so, see, though the Philistines are deficient theologians for certain, and really deficient historians, but they realize enough to understand the Exodus story. They heard the Exodus story and they understand it enough, and they brought it up in the last chapter too, that Israel's God must, in their view, Israel's God must be given weight. All right, once again, you have a weighting offering. That's why I was explaining to you that word. You got a weighting offering dealing with a weighty God. All right, and so they must give weight to who this God is and what he can do. And they're going back to this story right here. And it's almost like they ask the question themselves and then they answer the question themselves. They say, why do you harden your hearts? And they're saying, well, since then, and that's why I used the answer right here. You can go and get to him. Scotty, go ahead and get it. Then, so it's sort of one of those deals where you ask a question and answer a question. That's what they do here. So they ask the question. We don't see anyone else answer the question. They immediately go to answer it themselves. They say, it's almost like they're saying, well, since you have these hardened hearts and you're debating and you're waffling on this issue right now, then send it away. And they're really saying in a manner that proves if God has done this. They say, do this in a way, send it away in a manner that proves that God has done this. And so what you see is that they have, and we read it already, that they have this elaborate thing where they take a new cart. It's verse 7. They take 2 milk cows, so obviously female cows that have never been yoked, and that maybe has something to do with even, without blemish kind of thing. So would have never been yoked, or maybe that these would be cows who would do what they would naturally do because they've never been yoked before. That's one way of looking at it. You're going to hitch the cows to the cart, but then you're going to take their calves and you're going to keep them at home. All right, because what's the natural thing going to be for the cows to do? To go wherever they think that their calves are, to be looking for their calves. And so you'll see then they're to take the ark of the Lord. They set it in a cart, put the tumors and the rats in there, and return it to him as a trespass offering in a chest by its side. They're smart enough not to put it inside, which is interesting to say because next week we look at the end of this chapter. The people of Beth Shemesh are not apparently smart enough to not open the ark and look in it. All right. The Philistines were at least smart enough to not open that thing. All right. They put it in an ark size, this little side note. It said, then send it away, the end of verse 8, and let it go. And watch if it goes up the road to its own territory, to Beth Shemesh, then he has done this great evil. But if not, then we shall know that it has not happened to us by chance. That's always that great human thing, right? Is this God or is this chance? And this is God working, and they do their little test. They do so, and then it says in verse 12, the cows headed straight for the road of Beth Shemesh, and they went along the highway, lowing as they went. Have you ever seen this? Have you ever done this? It's an interesting story. You should probably share sometime. But where if you have an animal and want to see, like, well, who it likes more or who should have it, And so you put it in the middle and both people call it, and you see who it goes to, that kind of thing. Well, in a sense, they're kind of doing this, they're putting this out here and they're saying, all right, see where they go. And they go straight to Beth Shemesh. And I noticed that it says, and they went lowing as they went. It's almost like they went happily there. They went naturally there. But also says they did not turn aside to the right hand or the left. And I think that goes back to with the calves. Because if they're looking for their calves, which they would naturally do, wouldn't they be going around back and forth, looking around, mooing and trying to hear if they get a response? But it says no, that they went straight on. And so while I would not recommend testing God as such, God seems to let them do it. And as I say, it's a questionable answer, but God lets them do it, and it proves to them that this is the hand of the God of Israel that has done this, and they let it go. And we'll pick up next week in verse 13 with the lords of the Philistines going and watching and seeing if it would go to Beth-Shemesh, and then what people of Beth-Shemesh do and how they mess up in doing it, and we see that going forth. But hopefully that was just an interesting way for you to walk through this with the questions and answers as they deal with the very questions of life in many senses that we ask. Not the specifics, but some of the questions that we ask. And we see what those answers were, but we see that people are people as they deal with their problems. And I'm just glad that we're not going and asking faulty priests and diviners who don't know nothing. But when we need to ask these questions, where do you go to get answers? You go to the Lord. And you go to the Lord in three ways, and I'll close with this. Really, in essence, you go to the Lord in prayer. You go to the Lord in His Word. And you can go to the Lord in the voice of other solid Christians that you know. And I guarantee you go to the Lord in that three ways, you're going to get the Lord's answer to your questions. And that's why I say these are good questions they ask, not questionable answers, because they weren't hearing the Lord's answers. But it is interesting to see where they went with it. And I don't think the Lord will lead you to make golden copies of any of your medical problems if you ask Him what to do. I really don't think He will. Or of vermin that are around your house. Probably He will not tell you to do that and put it in a bucket and send it anywhere. Let's go to the Lord in word of prayer. God, thank you for this opportunity to study your word. Like I said earlier, your word does not go forth void. And so even when it's kind of weird things we read in your word, we know it has to teach us, mold us, and shape us. So maybe even in a sense, some of the things we've learned tonight, we might not even realize right at this moment. But that you've taught us about the questions that we ask in life, and you've taught us about some of the answers that can be given. And so, God, we really pray, Lord, that you would now take us home safe. And if we're not leaving yet, stand for choir practice. You bless this choir practice to follow. Thank you for the beautiful weather we have out here tonight, Lord, and for this time of year that you give us. And as we see your creation all around us, may it be a further source of reflection and enjoyment of what a great God you are, the great creator of the universe, but also the new creator of us in Christ Jesus. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Good night.